All right, welcome to the show. Today we're going deep, really deep, into cell signaling,
Oh, yeah.
specifically the p38 pathway.
Very cool.
Yeah, we've got a whole stack of research articles
Right.
and lecture excerpts here to unpack.
Right.
And trust me, this pathway is way more exciting
Yeah.
than it might sound at first glance.
For sure.
Think of it like unlocking a secret code to like how our bodies respond to stress, inflammation,
Huh?
and even signals from receptors like CB1, CB2, and 5-HT2A.
Right. Those are really important.
Yeah, so before we get lost in the weeds, how about we rewind back to the beginning?
Okay.
How was this pathway even discovered?
Well, like a lot of scientific breakthroughs, it was kind of an accident.
Oh, really?
Yeah, researchers were studying how cells respond to stress,
Hmm.
and they kind of stumbled upon this key player in the whole process.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it just goes to
It
show.
reminds me of penicillin.
Exactly.
It's a happy accident
Yeah.
that revolutionized medicine.
Totally.
So once they found this pathway, what did they actually learn about what it does in our bodies?
Well, think of it like a cellular emergency response team.
Okay.
It gets activated by all sorts of signals, from stress hormones to UV radiation to inflammatory molecules.
Wow.
And what's really interesting is that it can either promote or inhibit inflammation,
Oh, interesting.
cell growth, even cell death, depending on the context.
So it can do opposite things.
Yeah.
How does it decide which way to go?
Well, that's one of the big mysteries. Researchers are still trying to figure that out. It seems to depend on like a complex interplay of factors, like the type of cell, the strength of the signal, how long the signal lasts, and just the overall cellular environment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like this delicate dance
Okay.
with p38 responding to these subtle cues to orchestrate the right response.
All right. So let's break down the steps
Yeah.
of this cellular dance.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
talking about signal transduction pathways here.
Mm-hmm.
Could you remind me how those work again?
Imagine like a relay race,
Right.
where each runner is passing a baton to the next runner.
Yeah.
In a signal transduction pathway, the baton is a signal.
Mhm.
The runners are molecules that relay that signal
Okay.
from the outside of the cell to the inside,
Gotcha.
and ultimately to the nucleus where the DNA is.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah,
That makes it much easier to visualize.
right.
So let's zoom in on the p38 pathway specifically.
All right.
What are the key steps involved in transmitting a signal through this pathway?
All right, let's start with activation.
Okay.
Something triggers the pathway. It could be a stress hormone
Mm-hmm.
binding to a receptor on the cell surface,
Right.
or it could be damage to the cell's DNA from UV radiation.
Okay.
Whatever the trigger is, it sets off this chain reaction.
So that's the starting pistol for the relay race.
Exactly.
What are the first runners in this particular pathway?
The first runners are a group of enzymes called MAP kinases,
Oh my goodness.
or
APKKs for short.
Okay,
Yeah.
MPKKs, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is.
I'm guessing they activate another kinase.
You got it.
Okay.
They activate another group of enzymes called, you guessed it,
What?
MEK-kinase kinase,
Okay.
or MPKKs.
So we've got MEKKs activating MPKKs.
Yep.
Where does P38 come into play?
So P38 is waiting further down the line,
Okay.
ready to receive the signal from an activated MAPKK,
Mm-hmm.
specifically an enzyme called MKK3 or MKK6,
Okay.
phosphorylates P38.
So I remember from biology class
Yeah,
that phosphorylation is like flipping a switch.
it is.
So that's what activates P38.
Exactly.
Okay.
Once P38 is phosphorylated, it's like it's been given the green light
Mm-hmm.
to carry the signal forward.
So what happens next?
Yeah.
Does activated P38 just run straight to the nucleus?
Not so fast.
Okay.
P38 interacts with a whole cast of characters along the way.
Oh, really?
It can activate other kinases.
Oh, it can interact with proteins that regulate gene expression.
Mm-hmm.
It can even trigger the production of molecules that control inflammation.
Wow, so it's not just a linear pathway.
No.
It's a whole network of interactions.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the nature of those interactions can vary
Right.
depending on the specific molecules involved.
Yeah.
Sometimes P38 directly phosphorylates its target, flipping that switch.
Okay.
Other times it might bind to a protein, changing its shape and function.
So it's like P38 is a master manipulator,
That's a great way to put it.
pulling strings and directing traffic within the cell.
Yeah, and the implications of these interactions can be pretty significant.
Okay.
Depending on who P38 interacts with, it can influence everything from cell growth and division
Mm.
to the production of inflammatory molecules
Yeah.
to to the decision of whether a cell lives or dies.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, heavy stuff.
This is getting really complex, but I'm starting to see
Yeah.
how powerful this pathway is.
Right.
But it can't just keep going forever.
Right.
There's got to be a way to stop the signal.
Yeah, right.
What are the off switches for this pathway?
So one important mechanism is dephosphorylation.
Right.
Remember how phosphorylation flipped the switch on?
Yeah.
Well, dephosphorylation removes that phosphate group, effectively turning the switch off.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Are there other ways to stop the cascade?
Another way is through the degradation of p38 itself.
Okay.
Cells have sophisticated machinery for breaking down proteins that are no longer needed.
Right.
And p38 is no exception.
So it's like recycling the components of the pathway.
Exactly.
To ensure that it doesn't stay active for too long.
Right. And this tight regulation is crucial for preventing the p38 pathway from going rogue and causing problems.
Okay, so we've got activation.
Yep.
A complex web of interactions,
right.
And then mechanisms for shutting down the pathway. But how does all of this connect to the bigger picture?
Yeah.
You mentioned receptors like CB1, CB2, and 5-HT2A.
That's where it gets even more interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
These receptors, which you might recognize from discussions about pain, mood, even the effects of cannabis, have potential links to the p38 pathway.
Wait, really? So activating those receptors could actually influence what's happening with p38?
There's evidence to suggest that, yes.
Oh, wow.
For example, some research shows that activating CB1 receptors can actually dampen down
interesting.
p38 activity in certain contexts.
Okay.
It's like those receptors have a direct line to p38 and can kind of tweak its behavior.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It makes you realize just how interconnected everything is within the cell.
It really does.
Wow.
And it opens up this whole new avenue of research into how we might be able to manipulate these pathways for therapeutic benefit.
Yeah.
Like if we can understand how those receptors talk to p38, we might be able to develop new drugs that target those interactions to treat a variety of conditions.
This is absolutely fascinating. Okay,
Yeah.
Hook.
All right.
Let's dive deeper into those connections.
Well, let's do it.
Lead the way.
So we know these receptors,
Okay.
CB1, CB2, and 5-HT2A. They're involved in a bunch of important processes.
Right.
CB1 and CB2 are the main receptors for cannabinoids.
Okay.
You know, those compounds found in cannabis.
Right.
And they play roles in pain perception, mood regulation, even appetite.
Okay.
5-HT2A, on the other hand, is a serotonin receptor.
All right.
And it's involved in things like mood, perception, and cognition.
Okay, so these receptors are all involved in some pretty heavy-hitting functions.
They are.
In the brain and body. But how do they actually connect to the p38 pathway?
That's where the research gets really interesting.
Okay.
It seems like these receptors don't directly activate or deactivate p38. Instead, they work more subtly, influencing the signals that feed into the p38 pathway.
So it's like they're whispering in p38's ear.
Exactly.
Rather than shouting commands.
Yeah. For instance, one study found that activating CB1 receptors can reduce the production of certain inflammatory molecules that would normally trigger the p38 pathway. So it's like CB1 is intercepting those inflammatory signals before they even reach p38.
That's fascinating. It's like a preemptive strike against inflammation.
Precisely.
Wow.
And there's evidence to suggest that CB2 receptors might work in a similar way.
Oh, okay.
Modulating the inflammatory signals that activate p38.
So both of the cannabinoid receptors could be influencing p38's response to inflammation.
Potentially, yeah.
What about 5-HT2A? Does that receptor play a role as well?
The research on 5-HT2A and p38 is still emerging.
Okay.
But there are hints that it might be involved in fine-tuning the p38 response in certain contexts. For example, some studies suggest that 5-HT2A activation could influence the production of molecules that either activate or inhibit p38.
Interesting.
Depending on the specific circumstances.
So it's like 5-HT2A is adding another layer of complexity to the conversation.
It is.
Potentially influencing p38's behavior in these subtle ways.
Exactly.
Wow.
And this intricate interplay between receptors and signaling pathways is what makes cell signaling such a fascinating and challenging field to study. It's like trying to decipher a complex code with each molecule playing a specific role in transmitting and interpreting information.
Okay, so we've gone from the big picture of how the p38 pathway was discovered to the intricate details of how it works. And even how it might be influenced by these other receptors. It's amazing how much research has gone into understanding this one pathway.
Yeah, it's a hot topic.
But I'm curious, why are scientists so interested in p38?
Yeah.
What makes it so important?
Well, as we've been discussing, p38 is involved in a ton of crucial processes.
Right.
But beyond that, its dysregulation, meaning when it's not working properly,
Yeah.
has been linked to a whole host of diseases.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So problems with p38 can actually contribute to disease.
That's right.
Wow.
Think about all the things p38 is involved in.
Yeah?
Inflammation, cell growth, cell death.
Right.
If any of those processes go awry, it can have serious consequences for our health.
Okay, can you give me some specific examples?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's start with inflammation.
Yes.
We know p38 plays a key role in regulating inflammation. But if it becomes overactive,
Right.
it can lead to chronic inflammation,
Okay.
which is a hallmark of diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, even certain types of cancer.
So it's like the p38 pathway is stuck on high alert,
Yeah, pretty much.
even when there's no real threat,
Right.
leading to constant inflammation and damage.
Exactly.
Oh.
And on the flip side, if p38 isn't active enough,
Yeah.
it can impair the body's ability to fight off infections or repair damaged tissues.
So it's all about balance.
It is.
Too much p38 activity and you get chronic inflammation.
Right.
Too little, and your immune system can't do its job properly.
Precisely. And that's why understanding the regulation of this pathway is so crucial
Right.
for developing new treatments for these diseases.
Okay, so we've got inflammation.
Yeah.
What about cell growth?
Mm-hmm.
How can problems with p38 lead to disease in that context?
Well, remember how p38 can influence cell growth and division?
Right.
If that regulation goes wrong,
Yeah.
it can contribute to the development of cancer.
Okay.
Some types of cancer cells have mutations
Okay.
that keep the p38 pathway constantly activated,
Right.
leading to uncontrolled cell growth.
So in those cases, p38 is like a runaway train,
Pretty much.
driving the growth of tumors.
That's a good way to put it.
Wow.
And in other types of cancer, p38 might be suppressed,
Okay.
allowing cancer cells to evade the normal mechanism that controls cell growth and death.
So it seems like p38 can be both a friend and a foe,
It can.
depending on the context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it such a challenging target for drug development.
Okay.
You want to find ways to manipulate p38 activity without disrupting its normal functions.
Okay, so we've covered inflammation and cell growth.
Mm-hmm.
What about cell death?
Yeah.
How can dysregulation of p38 contribute to disease in that context?
Well, remember how p38 can trigger apoptosis
Yes.
or programmed cell death
Sure.
if this process goes wrong?
Yeah.
It can contribute to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
Okay.
In these diseases, neurons die off prematurely.
Right.
And there's evidence that p38 dysregulation might be playing a role in that neuronal death.
So in these cases, it's like p38 is mistakenly triggering the self-destruct button
It could be.
in neurons.
Yeah, that's one possibility.
Wow.
And in other cases, p38 might be failing to trigger apoptosis when it should,
Right.
allowing damaged or abnormal cells to survive
Oh, wow.
and potentially contribute to disease.
Wow. It's clear that p38 is a powerful player in both health and disease.
It is.
It's involved in so many crucial processes, and even slight disruptions to its activity can have serious consequences.
Absolutely. And that's why researchers are so focused on understanding the intricate details
Right.
of how this pathway works, how it's regulated, and how it interacts with other signaling systems.
So all of this research,
Yeah.
all of this effort to understand p38, it's ultimately about finding ways to manipulate this pathway for therapeutic benefit.
Exactly. The ultimate goal is to develop new drugs that can target p38
Right.
or its associated molecules to treat a wide range of diseases. Imagine being able to fine-tune p38 activity to dampen down chronic inflammation,
Right.
prevent the growth of tumors, or even protect neurons from dying off in neurodegenerative diseases.
Oh.
That's the promise of p38 research.
That's an incredibly exciting prospect. But I imagine it's not easy to
No.
develop drugs that can selectively target
Yeah.
pathway as complex and interconnected as p38.
You're absolutely right. It's a huge challenge.
Right.
One of the biggest hurdles is that p38 is involved in so many different processes.
Right.
If you completely block its activity,
Yeah.
you're likely to cause a lot of unintended side effects.
So it's like trying to silence a single instrument in an orchestra
Yeah,
without affecting the rest of the music.
that's a great analogy.
Right.
And that's why researchers are exploring different strategies for modulating p38 activity.
Okay.
One approach is to develop drugs that target specific isoforms of p38.
Isoforms. What are those?
Isoforms are slightly different versions of the same protein.
Okay.
And it turns out that p38 has several isoforms,
Okay.
each with its own unique functions and tissue distribution.
So it's like having different models of the same car,
Exactly.
each with its own special features.
Yeah.
Yep.
And by targeting specific isoforms,
Right.
we might be able to selectively modulate p38 activity in certain tissues or cell types,
Okay.
minimizing side effects.
That's really clever. So it's about finding the right tool for the job,
It is.
the right isoform to target for a specific disease.
Precisely. And another strategy is to target the upstream regulators or downstream targets of p38
Okay.
rather than p38 itself.
Right.
This approach might allow for more fine-tuned control over the pathway's activity.
So it's like adjusting the volume or tone of the p38 signal rather than just turning it on or off completely.
Exactly.
Okay.
And researchers are also exploring the potential of combining p38 modulating drugs with other therapies,
Okay.
such as traditional anti-inflammatory drugs or chemotherapy.
So it's about finding the right combination of tools to create a symphony of therapeutic effects.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And ultimately, the goal is to develop personalized medicine approaches,
Right.
tailoring treatments to an individual's specific needs and genetic makeup.
That's the dream.
Yeah.
So p38 research is moving towards a more targeted and personalized approach,
It is.
taking into account the complexities of this pathway and its role in both health and disease.
Absolutely. And it's an incredibly exciting field to be a part of. There's so much potential for making a real impact on human health.
Well, you've certainly painted a vivid picture
Oh, good.
of the p38 pathway
Yeah.
and its significance.
Yeah.
It's amazing how something so small and invisible can have such a profound impact on our lives.
It's true. And it just goes to show that even the tiniest details can have huge consequences,
Right.
like other kinases, transcription factors, proteins involved in inflammation,
Right.
proteins involved in cell death. A list goes on and on.
Wow, so it's like p38 is a master puppeteer,
Yeah,
pulling the strings of all these different cellular processes.
that's a great way to put it. And by mapping out these connections, we can start to see how p38 orchestrates such a wide range of cellular responses.
So how do we actually map out these connections? What kind of tools do scientists use to study these molecular interactions?
Well, there are a whole bunch of techniques that scientists use to study these interactions.
Okay.
One common approach is to use biochemical assays. These are experiments that allow scientists to measure the activity of specific proteins or to detect interactions between proteins.
Okay, so these assays can tell us things like whether p38 is phosphorylating a particular target protein or whether it's binding to another molecule.
Exactly. And another powerful tool is genetic manipulation.
Okay.
Scientists can create cells that either lack p38 or have altered versions of p38, and then they can study how these changes affect cellular processes.
So it's like a game of molecular what if.
It is.
What if we take away p38 or change its function? What happens to the cell?
Precisely. And by comparing these genetically modified cells to normal cells, scientists can gain a deeper understanding of p38's role in various processes.
This is incredible. It's like scientists are becoming molecular detectives,
I like that.
using these tools to unravel the mysteries of the p38 pathway.
That's a great way to put it. And the more we learn about this pathway, the closer we get to understanding its role in both health and disease.
You know, speaking of health and disease, we've talked about how dysregulation of the p38 pathway can contribute to a variety of conditions. But I'm curious, are there any instances where p38 activation might actually be beneficial?
That's an interesting question. And it turns out that p38 activation isn't always a bad thing.
Really?
In some cases, it can actually be protective.
So p38 can play the role of both hero and villain.
Exactly. It all depends on the context.
Okay.
For example, p38 activation has been shown to protect cells from certain types of stress, such as oxidative stress, which can damage DNA and other cellular components.
So it's like p38 is a double-edged sword.
It is.
It can cause harm in some situations, but it can also protect cells in others.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
And this duality highlights the importance of understanding the nuances of p38 signaling.
Right.
It's not simply a matter of turning it on or off.
Right.
We need to understand the context in which it's activated and the specific downstream effects that it triggers.
That makes sense. So it's not just about targeting p38,
Right.
but about understanding the bigger picture. and finding ways to modulate its activity in a precise and controlled manner.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge that researchers are facing as they explore the therapeutic potential of targeting the p38 pathway.
We've been focusing on the cellular level, but I'm curious, how does the p38 pathway play out in the context of the whole organism?
Yeah.
Are there any systemic effects of p38 activation or dysregulation?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's an area where researchers are still piecing together the puzzle.
Okay.
But what we do know is that p38 signaling can have profound effects on various organ systems.
Okay, so what are some examples of these systemic effects?
Well, let's start with the immune system.
Okay.
As we've discussed, p38 plays a crucial role in regulating inflammation.
Right.
And when this regulation goes awry,
Yeah.
it can contribute to systemic inflammatory disorders, such as rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory bowel disease.
So it's not just about localized inflammation in a particular joint or organ, but it can affect the entire body.
Exactly. And p38 dysregulation has also been implicated in cardiovascular disease.
Oh, wow.
Studies have shown that p38 activation can contribute to atherosclerosis,
Okay.
the buildup of plaque in the arteries.
Oh, wow. So problems with p38 could actually increase the risk of heart attacks and strokes.
That's right.
Wow.
And the implications extend to the nervous system as well.
Oh, okay.
p38 dysregulation has been linked to neurodegenerative disorders, such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease.
So it seems like the p38 pathway is a major player in a wide range of systemic diseases.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
And that's why understanding its regulation and finding ways to modulate its activity are so crucial for developing new treatments.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From the discovery of the p38 pathway to its intricate molecular mechanisms, to its role in health and disease. It's been an incredible journey through the world of cell signaling.
It really has. And it's amazing to think that all of this complexity is happening inside every cell of our bodies, constantly working to keep us alive and functioning.
It's a bit humbling, isn't it? Realizing how much is going on beneath the surface that we're not even aware of.
It is. But it's also incredibly inspiring to think that scientists are working tirelessly to unravel these mysteries and to use this knowledge to improve human health.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah, I think so too.
So to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the fascinating world of the p38 pathway.
I hope so.
It's a complex story, but one that's worth understanding.
Yeah.
Because it has the potential to unlock new treatments for some of the most challenging diseases facing humanity.
Absolutely.
Awesome. We'll keep those brains firing.
Yes.
And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Sounds great.
For another adventure into the world of science and discovery.
See ya.